What I'm going to be talking about is hopefully a little bit inflammatory, a little bit challenging, and almost an extension of what I was talking about this morning, where I was talking, this morning was very much more about architecture, design, and technology. This is going to try to rebase ever so slightly our thinking around agility and what we'll do. So it's almost become something that would fail the not test these days to say, who in the room is an Agile software developer? The majority of you will probably raise your hands. It's not something that typically goes on a CV as being something that's a differentiator for you, although I remember when it was. However, I think part of that commoditization of agility has, to a certain degree, removed us, several degrees sometimes, from what we were trying to do in the first place. And even to some degree, the Agile principles don't keep us particularly honest to it. We can still probably tick most of the boxes and still not get some of the benefits that I think that we sorely need. Okay, so who's seen me talk before? Who was in the talk this morning? Cool, then you know what's coming to a certain degree. You know when things happen, what's happening. Okay, but it is a different story. Okay. My name is Russ Miles. I do these sorts of talks a lot, and my main mission is to help people develop software that is not just simpler, but that brings the advantages of simplicity, which is, I think, more adaptable software. Okay? What does that mean on a track primarily talking about process? Well, hopefully it's going to bring a bit of rebasing into the room, perhaps, but a bit of a shift in our thinking to understand some of the reasons we're doing what we do. So I call this, without simplicity, there's no agility. Slightly inflammatory. I was going for a bit of a punch after lunch. I then moved on. I said it could be, let's stop polishing the process turd. Does everyone know what a turd is? Is everyone familiar with, yeah, okay. And I thought that may be going a step too far. So let's stop polishing the process turd quite so much. Okay, I would like to just remind us of what we're trying to achieve, and hopefully by the end of this session, it will have got you thinking a little bit differently about what you do as a job, as well as what we're all trying to achieve in software development. I don't aim low. I did have a more politically correct answer, though. I did decide to say, on what matters, which I loved because it was very echoey of Bertrand Russell, my favorite philosopher at the moment anyway, in that he didn't pull punches either, and I like the fact that I can talk up here because I get to be on this massive stage about what I think matters in software development. But you might be asking yourself, aren't we already there yet? I mean, who's an Agile software developer? Give me a raise of hands. Who would say they're not an Agile software developer? Who would say they work in some other facet of software delivery but would never call themselves a developer? Okay, that's about the base I was thinking. Okay, yes. So arguably, there's a lot of thinking out there, and I encounter this a lot with clients, where they say, we've gone Agile. It's done. And I try to understand what that means for them. That's usually my first job, is to understand why they think they're done and why being done was ever actually part of the reason they were there in the first place. And it usually comes round to they've adopted some process, which you're all probably familiar with, several processes perhaps, or approaches. And I often get a bit of a shock because I'll turn around and say, so you've organized your work. How's that working out for you? Is that all you've done? And that does often get a little bit of a comeback. But that's essentially what, your Scrum, BAN techniques are. It's means of organizing work as effectively as possible. And that's great. That's a really long distance to have come from where we were. I do remember the several year projects that resulted in nothing being delivered. So we've come a long way, but have we just really organized our work better? And that's what I would put to you, is I think that we've spent a lot of effort, probably quite rightly, on getting our process better, getting better at how we organize the work we have to do, recognizing some of the features of what software is all about, but without recognizing them all. So those are the sorts of features I want to leave you with today, is the features of software delivery that still matter and that are still a challenge and that deserve your thought, because the answer isn't always going to come off a stage. It's going to come very much from the sorts of people that come to these sorts of conferences. Okay, so if we could just darken the room completely, if we can. This is so much better in a big room. Wow. Okay, hopefully no one's sitting next to someone they feel uncomfortable with right now. And that hopefully isn't completely nervous laughter. Okay, because what I'd like to do is tell you a little story. Another little story, because I told one this morning. This story is about possibly the best client I ever met. So this morning's story was a bit kind of depressing, I think, for everyone. So this story is more of an uplifting story. Put yourself in my shoes. Close your eyes, if you will. I was brought in, everything was good. I met my client, they turned around and said, "We want you to help with our team." I started to help the team. I had the worst moment that any consultant is likely to encounter. I couldn't help them. They were that good already. They were already using great techniques, great practices, great processes. They knew what value they were trying to deliver. They were in a safe place. And so I had the unfortunate moment. Picture yourself in this moment. This is why I've darkened the room. You are that person now. Walking up to your major stakeholder and having to say the words no one wants to, which is, "You don't need me. You're done. I can't think of anything else to do here." I wasn't just turning something small down. This was 2 years' worth of effort ahead of me. It was a lot of money to turn away. But I did. The next words were amazing. They were, "Okay, we're good enough. Why don't you go and check that we're doing the right thing?" So I did. And that's what I want to talk about today, is moving past the process and practices and into doing the right thing. And to do that, we need to rebase what matters in software delivery. So, lights back up, please. Whoa, that's quick. Whoa, that's bright. Okay. No one left because I was watching the doors. That's probably because no one could see the stairs. Okay. So the story hopefully puts you in the mindset of trying desperately to figure out what could it be added to this team. These teams were doing amazing things. They were using the right technologies. I was amazed at the plethora of technologies they were experienced and expert in, and I was trying to help. That's my job. And I couldn't give them anything new. So I was sent off to see the value that was being delivered. And it was appropriate, but it was completely the wrong thing. Okay. So, why was it the wrong thing? What were some of the forces that could work against them? They were using a good process for managing their work. They were using all these great practices. What could have gone wrong? Well, the forces against them, first of all, they were slowing down. They were good, but they were slowing down. Okay, you've probably all experienced this yourselves, where you get to a certain point, whether it be sprint 10, sprint 13, sprint 30, whatever. There's usually a moment at which things are getting slower. And people start talking about taking a few sprints to alleviate technical debt. Or they start talking about how we need to do some refactoring for a few days. Part of this is because we're not recognizing the natural emergence of the problem space we're working in. We're not working in manufacturing by any stretch. And although we have work management techniques, processes that help us with many of the aspects of running our lives and doing the right work, we aren't necessarily helped in the fundamental unknowableness of software. Neil Ford this morning talked about the unknowable unknowables. This is really a tragically difficult part of what we do. We don't really help ourselves with entanglement, whether we're working in the software development teams or we're talking about communication structures between teams. We don't help or control or in any way manage these sorts of entanglement that, again, slows things down. And one thing we seem to have forgotten, even though it is said many times in the literature, is that human comprehension is the single biggest restriction, the one that can really stop you going any further. We all laugh about it when we hear someone say, okay, we're going to take, I know you've got these 10 people, but we're going to take those 10 people, get rid of them, and bring in a different 10 people. Is that okay? They're all software developers, roughly the same level, pass the same interview. Are you good? Are you feeling confident? Probably not. That's because we recognize that someone's comprehension of the problem and comprehension of the artifact that we create in software, which is the code itself, is incredibly valuable and important to our productivity, important to our progress. And we tend to confuse it because we tend to push this particular problem into the background. We still desire to build software like we were building parts on an assembly line. And we also have our assumptions. Probably everyone in this room is very successful at what they do, or at least planning to be. And one of the issues with what we do is we tend to expose ourselves to the possibility of things going wrong all the time. As a consultant, we get very good at backtracking. We get very good at being able to say, didn't know that, that's different now. My knowledge is refined, now this is my advice. Not easy. And you can tell an experienced consultant from a non-experienced one in their ability to do this. The problem is we're making assumptions all the time and we're making them hidden away. We hide those assumptions behind either authority, in which case we point at a book and say, it's what it says in there, therefore we should do this way. Or we hide behind strength of statement, our forcefulness of will. Who's a scrum master in the room? Who likes that master bit? Right? Power. No? I actually changed the name of scrum masters in my particular, one of my particular organizations. I called them scrum facilitators. I've got a lot of resistance. Okay, but essentially, that was a majority of the workload that they were conducting. I do have an issue with the master part. I don't think, it implies authority and answer that I don't think it's fair to push on other people. I have a similar issue with the definitions of Agile coach, Agile software developer, Agile. And have you had that experience where you go to, I don't know, some social gathering where there are other Agile-ists, and you ask them what Agile is. And if you're lucky, you get appointed to the manifesto. If you're unlucky, you don't get anything like that. You get several answers. And so my problem is that there's a lot of assumptions we build up, and there's a lot of things we don't know, and we hide them behind some authority, or we hide them behind our strength of will or our roles, and it's actually anti this whole learning thing we're trying to do as we build software. So what are the problems of software development? What are the issues I see today in what we do? Well, first and foremost, overproduction. Quick show of hands, who knows what overproduction is and has seen it happen? Okay, that's quite a few hands. Okay, overproduction, just to give it a characteristic, is building the wrong thing right. Actually having built something, potentially done it in an extremely effective way, but it happening to be the wrong thing, whether it be too much or too little, we've overproduced. The analogy I like to give, who's married in the room or got a partner right now that they're living with? The living with part's important. Okay, right. Okay, so picture the scene. You've just come home. You're tired. You spent a long day being a scrum master. And you've come into your house and you can sense there's something wrong, can't you? You've forgotten something, but you don't know what it is by any chance. You can't even imagine what it might be. So what do? You run around the room. You do all the tidying. If you've got kids, you put them to bed. Okay? You pick the movie that he or she will like this evening. You go and cook the meal that they love. You do everything. You clean, right? You clean the place. And you set the dinner with the candles, the music they love and you detest. And you've set it, and you sit down and you can still see it in their eyes. Something's wrong. And you start to feel a little bit hard done by. And so you have to ask, what's wrong? And then you get the answer, and the answer could be something, and is often as trivial as, why didn't you give me a hug when you came in? Boy, have you overproduced. So overproduction, despite being a fun story, is not something we want to be doing, and it's a source of massive waste in the industry. And I think we've spent the last 10 to 12, 13 years getting to a point where we can achieve overproduction. Because in the past, we couldn't produce much at all. I don't know if anyone else has had similar experiences to me, but I've spent several years, sometimes almost decades, with companies never delivering any software. And yet we were a solutions delivery company. So I can see the improvement. I certainly endorse and understand the improvement that we've achieved. And I do think the processes we applied have helped a great deal. But it's still there. And now it's almost like we've tuned the engine to the point where we can now fire all cylinders, head off into the sunset and hit a brick wall. We're now capable of it. In the past, we couldn't even get the engine started. So we were having that problem. But now it's all about where are you going and getting there in the most effective way. So, overproduction, building the wrong thing, but potentially building it right. And the next problem is, how do you build software that adapts to the fact that you don't know yet what the right thing is? Okay, this is an essential problem in software. It's not that we're indecisive. We really don't know what the answer is yet. And I'll talk about why we don't know in a moment. So we need techniques, technical techniques that help us create software that can adapt, that can truly embrace change. We've got techniques that should help. TDD, continuous integration, to some degree continuous delivery, clean code. These are techniques that help us create code that can adapt. But I would suggest that we are not going anywhere near far enough. So it's no good looking at these things in isolation. It's no good saying, should we fix overproduction by thinking about these things this way, and then ignoring the fact that we can't keep up with our software delivery in the first place. I suggest no. I would rather not spend the next 10 years solving one problem and not the other. Because, frankly, I've probably only got another 20, 30 years of my career. And I would like to see a better world at the end of it. Okay? Or sometime beforehand. Okay, so these are not just problems out of thin air. These are problems I've been writing up into a book that I'm working on at the moment. And the primary goal of this book is to address both of these issues and bring these two threads together, because there are a lot of smart people addressing either end of the scale. I'm trying to bring the two together. And so I put to you that I think the problems of software delivery, and you as Scrum Masters, Agile project managers, testers, have a massive part to play here. Okay, for me, it's about overproduction, and it's about somehow keeping my software adaptable. Okay, those are our problems. By the way, I'm an amateur philosopher. So once you've got problems, you start to work towards axioms. And if you saw the axioms this morning, I apologize, I'll run through them relatively quickly. The axioms being, your software first and foremost should be useful. I don't know many people who would argue against it. Slightly utilitarian perspective on the world. But we aren't here to make beautifully crafted things. We're not here to necessarily create art. We're here to create something that has value and is useful. Okay? Arguably, it's possible that some software could be so beautiful, even if it didn't work, it could be considered art and valuable. I haven't met it yet. If anyone has, I would love to see it. But I have met, through the course of my career, something that could be considered beautiful code. And when I hear that phrase, a little part of me dies. Because it's usually beautiful code because somebody smart is telling other people that it's beautiful. Okay? This is beauty. What do you mean you can't understand it? It is. And I'm smarter than you, so therefore, whatever you want to do to this amazing piece of code, this is awesome. And I experienced this when I was working with O'Reilly on the beautiful code book. And I had to, in the end, come away from it a bit because this was not my definition of beauty. I wanted code that was very different from something that attracted the intelligentsia only. I wanted cartoon code. Right? I wanted a level of code that was as easy to read as the funnies in a newspaper. If I could achieve that, I think I'm winning. And I'll explain why in a minute. But that aside, just getting it useful is probably gate 1. Gate 2, the best software is the software you don't have to write at all. Otherwise known as the make yourself redundant rule. Okay, what does this mean? It needs to be explained. Going back to our story, I had the best team, great tech practices, great techniques, even a valuable problem to be solved. I noticed when I went to observe what was going to be done with the software they were building that they did not need to build what they were doing. There was a much easier answer and a simpler answer. All that was actually required was some post-it notes and a wall. They were about to embark on a 10-man team, 2-year effort to build a piece of software in, well, one of the things was Scala, but also several other languages as well, for no good reason. And so when I approached my stakeholder and said, I think you're probably doing the wrong thing. I think we could do something else, unless I'm oversimplifying it. She actually turned around and said, I know, but we need to be delivering something, and we're going to deliver that. So I couldn't in all conscience continue. But interestingly enough, even in the face of doing something else, that was going to be ignored. And that was the argument I had, which was, it's not a question of deliver software or make yourself redundant. It's deliver something, make a useful change, and if you can do it quicker, a different way, why not move on to something else? Why not do something else? You're making yourselves redundant. You're just being able to do more. Isn't that better? And unfortunately, this didn't work in that particular case. But in other cases since, it has. And people have recognized that if there is a non-software solution, that's something we should be considering. It's a danger of our industry, I think, that when problems are brought to us, they are brought to us as solutions. Build this, please. You're lucky if you get a please. Build this, minion, and do it quickly. Oh, and project manager, here's a list, here's a backlog. Go forth and do this. It's all understood. Please, just do it. This is another reason why we have overproduction, is this implied belief that we know exactly what solution we're building by the time it hits us. 9 times out of 10, the solution is not known. And we're not asking the questions that would explore that. Human comprehension is king. I've mentioned this already once today. Your software, your artifact of what you build, your teams build if you're not developing it yourself, is the reason you're there. I've met teams that are the best teams I've ever met, and if they're still building the wrong thing or they're building it the wrong way, it makes no good. It doesn't equate exactly that a great team will build great software. You can have brilliant teams that don't. So you need that aspect of concentrating on who's going to consume this thing we create, this code. Well, first and foremost, human beings, without a doubt. Other humans are going to want to read this, and they are going to be the key limiting factor to you continuing to be successful. This is where we talk about the slowdown in projects, where we talk about technical debt alleviation. A lot of that is around the fact that not only have we made assumptions in the past that now disagree with us, or disagree with what we've got to do next, people can't comprehend what we've got anymore. And this is an insidious one as well, because it's not always obvious that people can't comprehend it. You just notice they start to slow down. Mechanical sympathy is the queen. Well, this is kind of an acknowledgement that, of course, every piece of code we're writing needs to also address the consumer that is the machine in wherever it's going to run. So that's important, but it's seen, if you like, as slightly secondary in a patriarchal monarchy, where essentially it's there in support of human comprehension as well. And this is the biggie, particularly for this session, which is that we do research and development. I've heard this a few times from some very smart people, but I don't think it's out there in industry enough. That we are involved in research and development. We don't know what we're building yet. So everyone who works out budgets based on yearly expenditure needs to recognize that that money could be spent to try to achieve some things, but we don't know what they are yet. Very difficult sell, that is. Some mechanisms I've had success with is to turn around and say, think of it like a sweet shop, where you don't yet know what you fancy, and you can help to pick what you want as you work over time, rather than thinking you have to buy it all up front. But it's a very tricky one to overcome. And I think it comes from a fundamental misunderstanding. We have sold ourselves down the road. We've said we are software developers, not software research and developers, or problem research and developers, or solution research and development people. We've lost that, and it hurts us. And I guess just to play a little bit to our ego, just slightly, is that software development itself is an extremely challenging pursuit. I don't think many people here would argue with it, would you? Is anyone going to turn around and say it's the easiest thing they've ever done? If you have, you've had a very interesting life. It is an intellectual pursuit. It doesn't happen there. I do not understand, and I still find it hard to comprehend, why we are infatuated by how fast we can use a keyboard. Okay, I've met developers who are very impressive with their IDE, to the point where I'm pretty sure it's like performance art. I can't see what they're doing anymore. It's brilliant. You try pair programming with them. Okay, but that's not important. That isn't where the value happens. Where we contribute most, well, for me, it's here. Well, no, not to the right. The middle bit. Okay? That's where I do most of my software development. In the shower, strange ideas come to me. And I am sad enough to admit, yes, I do have a waterproof whiteboard and pen that I can sit there and go, before I forget that, put that down. That's where it happens. But how many people who are working with software development teams truly recognize this and set up environments that support it? Oh, and some people do their thinking there, but that's a different game. Okay, so I think there are 3 areas for us to address, and I would put that to you. This is where I think we should be concentrating our efforts. First, I think we need to get better at exploring what is needed. Exploring and delivering the right thing. Whether it be a change in process or a change in anything, exploring the change we're going to make. Any software delivery is a change in the world. Okay? It's a change in someone else's, hopefully their ability to do perhaps their job or something similar. So we need to be much better at understanding we're about to cause a change and take responsibility as an agile software development team. That's important to us. Okay? Number 1. Number 2, A means of organizing work that embraces change. I kind of think we're there. I think we have means of organizing work. We've got the Kanbans and the Scrums of this world, and I think they're doing very, very well for us. So I don't think we need to spend a huge amount of effort there. Don't get me wrong, there's probably some research to be done. But by and large, how we organize ourselves and how we interact with one another is getting pretty good. Admittedly, there are some organizations that are very much early on the curve there. But I think what we're looking at is commodity rollout rather than huge research. 3, though, a means of managing the natural constraints of your software so that it can adapt. Because it's going to stop you otherwise. You can have the best processes in the world with the best backlog, even the best understanding of what you're going to build, and your software will still slow you down without taking it seriously. And that's what I call adaptable software. That's my mission, if you like, is to try to help people adopt tools and techniques that help their software be adaptable. As I mentioned in the prior session, it's not about configuration. Okay, it's not about whether you can change the behavior of software at runtime. It's about whether, when someone turns around to you tomorrow and says, I need you to do X because X is now the priority, you have prepared yourself and your software enough to say, okay, we have a process that helps us embrace change. My software is going to take that on board with me and not hold me back. Okay, so I was asked in the last session, what is simplicity? So I thought I'd share my definition. Reduction to the point that any further reduction will remove important value. It's a continuum. Okay? It sits as a means of reducing entanglement. Okay? Primarily, complexity is just entanglement. Okay? In a system where you're looking at technique to simplify or not, there will be complex, there will be about right, and there will be overly simplified. I'll give you an example of oversimplification. One of my good colleagues and friends, GOTO Aarhus, was asked to help an organization to simplify and deliver some value to a particular IT department. The IT department was simply stating they had a goal and it was important to them. It was a high value. When asked what that high value result was, it was, we're currently running at 40 million a year. We want to be running at 80. To be fair to GOTO, he's a man of principle. His first instinct was to hold out his hand and say, let's go buy a yacht. We can increase your revenue outgoings easily by just giving me 40 million right now. Okay? What I'm demonstrating here is an oversimplified goal. There was obviously caveats to this. The 40 million couldn't be spent for fun. There had to be other reasons why it was there. So specifying those other reasons, exploring what wasn't being stated, exploring the underlying assumptions, got him to a point where they can understand how simple an answer it could be. The other example was when I was working with a team in London where they said, we've been tasked with removing the call center. Okay, is that all? Yeah. Okay, we'll just remove it then. No. If we remove it, none of the calls will come in and we won't service our customers. Okay, so you want to reduce the cost of the call center, but with other things. Okay, we spend a lot of time oversimplifying answers. We're all doing probably iterative development here or some sort of iteration boxing, time boxing. Who's doing that sort of technique at the moment? Okay. How did you come to the understanding, it's a rhetorical question, how did you come to the understanding of how long an iteration should be? Was it what everyone else was doing? Was it following what someone else has dictated? We do too much of this. I'm not saying anyone else here has done this, but we do it in the industry. We take on doctrinal, authoritative answers without exploring why they're useful to us. And having a tool like Simplicity helps you to look at these sorts of approaches and say, does it make things better? Are we actually achieving a better impact? Okay, so it is this continuum of complex to simple to oversimplified. And we should be, in every decision we make, whether you're working as a Scrum Master, whether you're working as an Agile coach, or any manipulation to these complex human systems that deliver software, look at the impact you're trying to achieve and look at the simplest method of getting there. If the method of getting there is so simple that actually getting there is not going to achieve what you want, you've oversimplified. So I use this rationale, this thinking process in every single new technique that I apply to teams I'm working with. I explore, given a set of options, what is the impact I'm going to achieve, or I intend to achieve, and how could I measure it, and what assumptions is it based upon? And then I bring those new techniques, where possible, to an experimental scenario where I can look to see whether they truly will deliver that impact. But it's amazing to me, and maybe I'm in a room full of people that already do this, which is great. It's amazing to me how many times we fiddle and tweak with these complex human systems, trying to do something useful without ever looking at either the evidence that's already out there or building our own volume of evidence. Okay, so simplicity needs a little bit more definition. I started off with 5 principles. I grabbed them from John Mader's book on simplicity, which is great, wonderful book. The Laws of Simplicity. He had 5 main laws, which is organize, separate, reduce, hide, and adapt. Okay? Sort of guiding principles. So when looking at a change in process or looking at a change in the software, can we organize things better? We can't change anything unless it's organized. If things are chaotic, then changing anything is going to be very difficult unless you're trying to remove chaos. So you have to organize first. That was his main point. Separate things out. Make sure there are separations of concerns. The same thing works in terms of software as it also works inside the activities involved in teams. Make sure you understand what needs to be done and breaking it down. Don't think that's particularly argumentative. Reduce is the hard one without oversimplifying. Reducing what needs to be done, because sometimes you need to let go of something very, very dear to you. I was working with a team, a brilliant set of individuals who were struggling to be a team. And their issue was that every sprint on sprint, they were increasing their basically the amount of work they were taking into the sprint, because they felt like they were behind. Every sprint was another big batch of, oh, well, we had 5 things last time. We've almost finished 5. Why don't we bring another 5 in? And then the next one, well, we've almost finished those 9. Why don't we bring another 5 in? And so what you had was an incredibly demoralizing situation where the project management in any form were ripping their hair out, quite literally. And what could they actually do? Well, I reduced the situation down. I ran an experiment and I reduced it down. I said to them, what really matters? Delivery of one thing now is what you care about. You don't care about 2 weeks. You don't care about 2 months. You do for your planning, I understand that. But right now, nothing's working. So what I did, which was controversial and worked, and has worked several times, but don't just do it. Take it as something I've done and that you might find use from, is I broke that team into pieces. I had 3 people in the end. I had 3 people who could deliver. And I asked them, could they deliver something every day? Could they break up the work such that they were delivering something, ideally something of value, every single day? And they did. And the first 2 weeks were hell. Okay? But after that, sustainability crept in, and they began to know their working practices better. And they were actually starting to really hum. Then I had a question. Why don't we add more people into the team so that we can do more? No. I'll have another team of 3 or 4 people that will do this for me. Now, this just sounds like team structuring for agile teams. But it was a massive reduction at first in what they conceivably were supposed to be working upon. They'd measured work in progress as a measurement of progress. And there's a lot of people who still do that. It's about how busy people are, not what they're delivering. Well, I completely disagree. It's about what's being done. And that's what really helped. So reducing down the amount that's in progress is something we're familiar with Kanban anyway. So all I was doing was applying that in multiple areas across the technology stack as well. But I had to simplify these 5 anyway, because I thought they were a bit overblown. And so I have my principles, which are simply organize, reduce, and encapsulate. I've applied these 3 principles to everything from process to the software architecture, the software design, the code. Okay, I have a number of techniques I use to apply these principles, but these are enough for me to build experiments that make things better, that actually I can see in the measurables where things are improving or not. And again, I stress, when I run experiments, I run true experiments. I look for a hypothesis that can be disproved. I don't construct hypotheses that could always be proved. I look for ones that can be disproved, straight out of Karl Popper's thinking. Okay, so what I'm doing, whether it be process or software, is I reduce this entanglement. I make it so that people can comprehend what is going on. And that's an important point, the comprehension. It's very easy to separate from individuals and people what is going on and the progress of an agile process even from what they can tangibly see they're delivering. It's very easy for people and also potentially comforting to not comprehend the real impact of what they're doing. And so I would argue that it's not easy to increase comprehension. It is in software, it's actually relatively trivial in software, but in human processes and practices, as we're talking about in this track, it's one of the hardest things for people to accept because they feel the burden of responsibility. Okay, so OR is the key. It's the key principles. And the goal is very simply to beat the elephant in the stand-up. I couldn't get a picture of people actually standing up, unfortunately. Okay, what is the elephant in the stand-up? It's first of all, every piece of software you wrote yesterday that is going to argue with you today. Okay, but that's not all. It's also all the assumptions around requirements, around the processes you're doing, all of the practices you might be applying. It's all of those that may prevent you from re-examining those things today to get better at what you're doing tomorrow. So my problem is that there isn't just one elephant in the stand-up or one elephant in the room when you're doing software development. There's 2. There's the one that is all the assumptions and baggage and doctrine we already have, and the other is the actual software we're delivering. Okay, so my implorement to you, I suppose, is that by thinking about simplifying what you do, the software you're building, the solutions you're coming up with, the change you're making, you'll get better at doing what this drawing's trying to, perhaps not perfectly, show you. He is supposed to be pushing the elephant. It's not necessarily anything else. But the idea is, again, the software developers, don't ever get them to do drawings unless it's a whiteboard and you can get rid of it relatively quickly. So this was a drawing I put together. And the idea is we're trying to push these elephants along and to a certain degree just identify that they're there. Acknowledge that you yourself have your own baggage. I worked within a Scrum environment for several years before I realized that iterations were entirely arbitrary, as were stand-up meetings, which was a crazy thought at the time. I noticed that we were doing stand-ups when we didn't need them, so why do we do them every day? Now that's almost akin to saying Father Christmas doesn't exist to a child. But stand-ups are a wonderful technique for sharing your load and sharing your problems and getting some team support. How many people have seen it abused to make it status reports? Yeah. And it's painful. So I've actually been in the position of saying, well, we don't need a stand-up today because as far as everyone's aware, the way the tempos of these teams work, we haven't encountered problems. We know we haven't. So why not do some tomorrow? It's no problem. We'll experiment with this and see if it has any real effect. In that case, it didn't. And that taught me something very important, which I'm hoping I'm getting across, is that you, as software developers, are working not only in domains that are full of unknowns, but you're working and your ways of working are fluid and open for your own experiment. Okay, you can change anything you do and you might come across something better. And you'll come across it better for your given environment. And that's absolutely key. Okay. So let simplicity be your guide. Look for the patterns in your own behavior. Sorts of patterns I look for? Well, count the concerns. How many things are people trying to think about at a given moment in time? Okay, ask people and you'll get a fairly objective answer. Whether they're doing a technique or a part of the process, are they doing multiple things at once? If they are, stop it. We're human. We're not great at it. The rule is 5 plus or minus 2. I'm dubious about the plus. I think it's more like 5 minus 2, possibly minus another 2. Okay, so we recognize that as human limitation. Let's do things that allow us to focus. So count the concerns is a very simple pattern that I've used a lot. It's not about cardinality. It's not about doing lots of different things or be worried about how many things are happening. It's about how many things people have to think about at a given moment in time. Okay, it's about people and their own limitations, whether they're looking at code or whether they're working within a process. We know simplicity when we see it in software. We can apply the same techniques to our processes. Does anyone recognize this app? This is back in the day. This is back when Apple wasn't really sure what they did. Okay? Arguably, sometimes they don't now. But here, what this was XGrid. This was Apple giving you a parallel processing application that could work, you could harness the power of all your expensive desktops to run a piece of an algorithm, essentially. And it worked brilliantly. It was excellent. It did one thing, and it did one thing well. It doesn't necessarily make it a commercial success, I'm afraid, but it did that one thing. So we recognize simplicity when we see it. We recognize it. Why don't we treat our processes the same way? Everything is up for grab. Nothing is taboo. Be brutal in your reduction. And I guess the message here is sometimes it's tricksy because we come with our own baggage. Okay, being simpler in what we do and building simpler things is hard. Okay, who's a developer in the room? Who are the developers who see code roughly every day? Okay, wonderful. What's wrong with that code? Shout it out. First of all, what is UUT? Absolutely good question. It's unit under test, but you weren't necessarily going to know that. That's slightly conflicting, isn't it? But that's not the biggest problem. Sorry? No null check, also an issue. Not the only problem. We want it to be equal to Rachmaninoff just because we do. Yes, we have a magic string, so that's at least another problem. Absolutely. There's something else. No one's seen the bug. Please. String comparison is part of it, although you get away with it to some degree. But yes, I can see where you're coming from. It's not quite that. There's actually a bug that would cause this to be a bit of a nightmare to use. The parameters are the wrong way around. How many times has anyone ever experienced that? Has anyone ever written those assert lines and thought, is it expected or actual that goes first? And that's just in one line of code. So complexity is insidious and nasty. Imagine it in a complex human system. So some techniques are necessary to overcome this, and I need to close out now, I'm afraid. What sort of options have we got? The techniques I use. So the sort of techniques I use to build the right thing, things like impact mapping. Anyone here using impact mapping? Oh, look it up. Wonderful technique. Works well with specification by example. But I also use impact mapping beyond where it was originally keyed. I use impact mapping just to evaluate technical solutions, because they're all hypotheses about how you could approach a given piece of code. Real options, if you haven't looked into what Chris Matz is talking about, please do. And as a quick summary, simplicity itself is there it's a tool for us to use to simplify our processes. And I put it is a very key tool in helping us build adaptable software that embraces change and help us to adapt our processes and practices so they can also improve. My guidance to you is to use the 3 principles. Make sure things are organized such that you can comprehend them, then you can reduce, and where there is complexity that you just can't get away from because it is part of the problem, then that's when you have to encapsulate. Hide it away as best you can. Emergence is natural to what we do. It's part of the underpinnings of everything we do. And I put to you that I think adaptable software and processes and practices that can adapt will win. Companies that can adapt the way they build software because their people are able to think outside of the bounds and constraints of what they're working with at the moment will get far better quicker than everyone else. And if the software isn't holding you back, then you can deliver quicker anyway, or you still have the option to. Okay. Hopefully, that's given you a little bit of food for thought. Thank you very much for coming to this session. I hope you have an amazingly good conference, and I'll be at the conference party tonight. If you'd like to come up and tell me how wrong I am or how right I am, I don't mind which. But thank you very much.